The great conclave of the Cathar hegemony shimmered in the ambient light of the chamber, a vast, cavernous space grown from living crystal over millennia. Light, drawn from the captive heart of a miniature star suspended far above, refracted through the crystalline arches and pillars, casting a mosaic of soft, shifting colors across the assembled figures. Here, in the sanctum of galactic stability, silence was a language, and for an unnervingly long time it was the only one being spoken. The silence was heavy, freighted with an ancient dread that none present had ever truly experienced, but all knew from the deep records of their race. It was the silence of utter, profound uncertainty. At the center of the chamber, a holographic sphere of the void hung suspended, a perfect representation of their sovereign space. And within that sphere, a single, impossibly stark anomaly pulsed with a light that was not a light, a presence that defied every sensor, and every law of physics the hegemony had codified over 10,000 cycles of undisputed dominion. It was a vessel, that much their deepest scans could confirm. It had not arrived via hyperspace rupture, nor had it traversed the known fold points that stitched their galaxy together. It had simply appeared. One moment there was the placid, predictable emptiness of the Zephyr Deeps, a desolate border sector. The next there was it. A warship, for its energy signature, screamed of contained forces that could unmake suns, yet it bore no markings, no transponder codes, no allegiance to any known power, living or extinct. It was a shard of absolute black, a geometric slash in the fabric of reality that absorbed all light and offered no reflection. Its form was an elegant, brutalist spearhead, unadorned and seamless, a design so alien in its simplicity that it felt more like a physical law than a constructed object. It had drifted for a single rotation, silent and motionless, a monolith of terrifying potential. And then it had broadcast a message. A single, repeating burst of corrupted data, directed not at the hegemony's capital, but outward, toward the insignificant spiral arm where the younger races scrabbled for purchase. Grand Arbiter Kalen, his multifaceted eyes cycling through a dozen spectrums of light, felt the fine cilia on his primary appendages tremble. His carapace, the color of aged nebula dust and etched with the lineage of 100 arbiters before him, felt thin and brittle. He stood upon the highest dais, the weight of his office a physical pressure on his thorax. Before him, the members of the High Council shifted, their own carapaces clicking softly against the crystalline floor, the sound like the skittering of nervous insects in a vast, silent tomb. The message is fragmented, Loremaster Zeth's voice rasped, the ancient scholar's subvocalizers struggling to process the raw, chaotic data streaming from the holographic display. The syntax is fractured, the carrier wave degraded as if by an impossible journey. We have managed to reconstruct only a few phonetic elements, and they are perplexing. A glyph of crackling energy appeared beside the silent warship. It resolved into a waveform, jagged and unstable. The core phrase, Zeth continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow amplified by the chamber's perfect acoustics, repeats with a desperate insistence. The closest phonetic translation our archives can produce is Oig Ling for defenders of humanity. The silence that followed was deeper, colder. Humanity. The name settled in the chamber like a fine dust and irritant. A species barely post-industrial by galactic standards, a race of short-lived, emotionally volatile bipeds confined to a handful of systems. They were a curiosity, a footnote in the grander galactic tapestry, noted for their perplexing art and their illogical social structures. They were not a power. They were not a threat. They were, in the grand calculus of the hegemony, a variable so small as to be statistically insignificant. General Vorlag, his obsidian-black carapace polished to a mirror sheen and adorned with the stark crimson markings of the War Pact, took a heavy step forward. The floor resonated with his mass. Defenders of humanity, it is a trick, a provocation. No known power would align itself with such a primitive race. This vessel is a Trojan horse sent by the Glyptodan Ascendancy or the Silicon Hives of Cygnus. They use this absurdity to mask their true intent to test our resolve. The energy signature does not match any known Glyptodan or Cygnian technology, General, Zeth countered, his tone one of weary patience. Its power source is theoretical, a contained gravitational singularity. We have hypothesized such things, but to see one in a stable, mobile form, he trailed off, his intellectual reverence warring with his innate caution. It is akin to a primitive tribe discovering a fusion reactor. Then it is a weapon of some St. Age, a doomsday machine reactivated, Vorlag snapped, his serrated mandibles clicking in agitation. and its targeting of the humans is a feint. It seeks a weak point in our defenses, a distraction. While we puzzle over this meaningless hail, its true purpose unfolds. We must meet it with overwhelming force. We must dismantle it before its purpose, whatever it may be, is achieved. Kalen listened, his ancient mind processing the arguments as he had for centuries. Fear and aggression, the twin impulses of any sentient race facing the unknown. Vorlag's logic was simple, direct, and had served the hegemony well in consolidating its power in ages past. But this was different. This was not a rival empire posturing at their borders. This was a violation of reality itself, a warship from nowhere, a message that made no sense. To act with brute force was to strike blindly in the dark. One might slay a monster, but one was just as likely to shatter the mirror that revealed one's own face. The humans have been contacted. Kalen's voice was calm, a low thrum that vibrated through the crystalline floor, commanding absolute attention. A smaller figure, a diplomat from the Outer Reach Ministries, scurried forward. Yes, Grand Arbiter. As per protocol for any mention of a recognized species, a query was dispatched. Their response was prompt. And Vorlag demanded. The diplomat hesitated, consulting a data slate held in one of its delicate manipulators. They claim to have no knowledge of the vessel. They confirm that the term Defenders of Humanity is not a formal military or political designation within their government, which they call the Terran Alliance. They seemed as perplexed as we are. They have offered to send an envoy to discuss the matter. Vorlag let out a harsh, grating sound of derision. An envoy? To discuss a warship that could crack this moon in half? They are either fools or consummate liars. They play for time while their masters position this weapon. Or, Kalen said, his gaze fixed on the silent black ship in the hologram, they are telling the truth. Consider the possibility, General. Assume for a moment that this vessel is unknown to them. Assume its message is precisely what it appears to be. Why would a power of this magnitude be hailing, or whatever fragmented word that is, for them? What quality do they possess that would attract such attention? Loremaster Zeth's head tilted, a sign of deep contemplation among the Cathar. Their cultural records are chaotic. They are a species defined by paradoxes. They have achieved spaceflight, yet a significant portion of their population remains mired in tribalism and superstition. They compose music of sublime mathematical complexity, yet engage in acts of breathtaking barbarism against their own kind. They are capable of profound empathy and selfless sacrifice, yet their history is a litany of conflict. They are, by all logical metrics, dangerously unstable. And therefore a perfect tool for a hostile power to manipulate, Vorlag insisted. A pawn to be sacrificed. This envoy they offer to send, it is a spy or a martyr sent to gather intelligence or to trigger the weapon with their demise. A species that is illogical is not necessarily a species that is manipulable, Kalen countered, his voice a soft thunder. Their unpredictability may be their greatest defense. It may also be something else, something we have failed to properly assess. He turned his gaze from the hologram to the assembled council. For millennia, the hegemony has been the bedrock of this galactic sector. We have achieved stability not through blind aggression, but through calculated understanding. We have cataloged, studied, and integrated or isolated every species we have encountered based on a deep comprehension of their nature. But the humans, we have dismissed them. We have labeled them as chaotic primitives and filed them away in our archives. Perhaps that was an error. Perhaps our logic, so effective in understanding species that think as we do, is a flawed lens through which to view a species that does not. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the crystalline chamber. The shifting light patterns seemed to slow, the air growing thick with tension. We will not meet this vessel with warships, General, not yet. We will meet it with the tool that has always been our greatest strength, observation. And we will accept the humans' offer. Let their envoy come. Let them stand in this conclave under the light of our truth and speak. We will listen, and we will learn. If this vessel from nowhere is a threat, we must understand the nature of the bait before we attempt to disarm the trap. Vorlag's mandibles ground together in a gesture of suppressed fury, but he bowed his head in assent. The Grand Arbiter's word was law. The diplomats scurried away to make the arrangements, leaving the council once more in silence, their collective gaze fixed on the impossible ship hanging in the void. Kalen felt no sense of victory in his decision. He felt only a profound and chilling premonition. The universe, which had felt so vast yet so known for so long, had just revealed a depth he could not measure. And at the bottom of that abyss, for reasons he could not fathom, was a young, fragile species called humanity. The silence in the chamber was no longer one of uncertainty. It was the silence of a held breath, before a storm of unknown magnitude was about to break. The arrival of the human envoy was a study in calculated understatement. The Cathar hegemony, in its magnanimity, had cleared a docking bay in the celestial spire, a port reserved for the flagships of allied powers and the grand vessels of its own ministries. It was a space designed to awe, to impress upon any visitor the scale and antiquity of Cathar power. Arches of polished obsidian soared into a vaulted ceiling where holographic constellations wheeled in perfect, silent orbits. The air itself hummed with the barely contained energy of the station's core. Into this cavern of imperial grandeur drifted a ship that was, by comparison, little more than a mote of dust. It was a small, functional craft, its gray hull scarred with the telltale micropitting of interstellar travel. It had no grand, sweeping lines, no intimidating weapon emplacements, no glowing energy conduits. It was a simple, utilitarian vessel, a tool designed for a purpose, and it moved with a quiet, unassuming grace. It settled into its designated berth with a precision that was almost contemptuous in its perfection, its landing struts deploying with a barely audible hiss. There was no grand ceremony, no honor guard, no dramatic ramp deployment. A simple airlock cycled, and a single figure emerged. Grand Arbiter Kalen observed from a high gallery, flanked by Vorlag and Zeth. He had expected a delegation, perhaps a cadre of armored soldiers accompanying a pompous political figure, as was the custom of so many young, insecure races. He saw only one individual, a female of the human species, clad in a simple, dark blue uniform that bore no rank insignia, no medals, no ornamentation of any kind. She was small, frail by Cathar standards. Her exposed skin was pale, her hair dark and tied back from her face. She moved with a calm, deliberate economy of motion, her head turning slowly to take in the cavernous docking bay, her expression unreadable. She was not intimidated. She was not awed. She was observing. "One," Vorlag growled, his sub-vocalizer a low vibration of disgust. "They send a single, unarmed female to a potential confrontation with a galactic power. This is either supreme arrogance or an insult of the highest order." "Or," Zeth murmured, his multifaceted eyes narrowed in intense focus, "it is a statement of intent, a declaration that they do not perceive this as a military confrontation. They perceive it as a diplomatic inquiry. They meet our potential for overwhelming force with an absolute lack of it. It is a fascinatingly asymmetric response." Kalen said nothing. He watched the human female. She carried a small, flat case in one hand. She was met by a Cathar protocol escort, towering armored figures who dwarfed her. She inclined her head in a gesture of acknowledgement, her posture relaxed, her movements fluid. There was no fear in her. Kalen had spent his life reading the subtle cues of a dozen alien biologies, the tremor of an appendage, the dilation of a respiratory spiracle, the shift in pheromonal output. This human was a closed book, a placid surface over unknown depths. The calm she projected was not the fragile shield of a creature suppressing terror. It was the profound stillness of a mountain. When the envoy was finally ushered into the great conclave, the effect was even more pronounced. The vast, crystalline chamber, designed to diminish and intimidate, seemed only to frame her. She walked to the center of the floor, placing her small case beside her, and stood before the dais of the Grand Arbiter, her gaze lifted to meet his. The assembled members of the High Council, a gallery of some of the most powerful beings in the sector, shifted and murmured, their collective presence a palpable wave of pressure. The human did not flinch. "I am Ambassador Alara Vance of the Terran Alliance," she said. Her voice, unamplified, carried with perfect clarity through the chamber. The universal translator rendered her words in flawless, formal Cathar high tongue, but it was the cadence, the calm, measured rhythm of her speech that was so arresting. "I thank the Cathar hegemony for agreeing to this meeting. We share your concern and your confusion regarding the unidentified vessel at your border." Kalen leaned forward slightly, his ancient voice rumbling through the chamber. "Ambassador Vance, your species is young, your territory small, yet a vessel of unimaginable power has appeared, and it's first. And only utterance is a call for defenders of humanity. You claim to have no knowledge of this. We find that difficult to reconcile." "Truth is often difficult to reconcile with expectation, Grand Arbiter," Vance replied, her tone respectful but firm. "We have reviewed our deepest historical archives, our most classified military projects, even our speculative fiction. The vessel's design, its energy signature, its method of arrival, They correspond to nothing we have ever built or ever conceived of building. We are, in this matter, as ignorant as you. Then explain the message. Vorlag's voice boomed from the side, a clear breach of protocol. Is it a code, a signal to a sleeper cell, a trigger for some hidden human insurgency? Vance turned her head slowly to face the general. Her gaze was steady, her expression unchanging. General, we are a transparent species, not by choice perhaps, but by necessity. Our internal conflicts, our political divisions, our technological developments, they are broadcast across our networks for all to see. A conspiracy of this scale is simply not within our nature or our capability. The message is as much a mystery to us as its source. She paused, then added, however, we have a hypothesis. A ripple of interest passed through the council. Loremaster Zeth leaned forward, his antennae twitching. Please, Ambassador, share it with us. Vance gestured to the case beside her. It opened with a soft chime, and a small, sophisticated holographic projector rose from within, casting an image into the air before her. It was not a weapon schematic or a tactical map. It was a sprawling, impossibly complex diagram of language, a tree of etymological evolution, showing the phonetic shifts and semantic drifts of human communication over thousands of their years. The broadcast was heavily degraded, Vance explained, her finger tracing a path through the glowing lines of light. Your translation of the core phrase was Oig Ling for Defenders of Humanity. It is a valiant effort, given the corruption of the data. However, our linguists, working with the raw data you provided, believe the original uncorrupted phrase was slightly different. The term you interpreted as a verb, Oig Ling, we believe is a phonetic ghost of the word hailing. A standard communication request, but the most significant error is in the second part. The energy fluctuations in the signal suggest a momentary power dip during the transmission of a key syllable. She manipulated the hologram. A single glyph in the translated phrase pulsed, then changed. We do not believe the message was hailing for defenders of humanity, she said, her voice dropping slightly, imbued with a new gravity. We believe the message was hailing. We are the defenders of humanity. The chamber fell utterly silent. The distinction was subtle, yet the philosophical chasm it opened was immense. One was a plea for aid, the other was a declaration of identity. Vorlag scoffed. A meaningless distinction, a boast from a forgotten power, it changes nothing. On the contrary, General, Vance said, her gaze unwavering. It changes everything. The term Defenders of Humanity is not a military title, as you suspected. It is a philosophical one. It is the central tenet of a school of thought that arose during a period of our history we call the Great Reconciliation. It was a time after centuries of internal conflict, when we came perilously close to self-annihilation. The survivors concluded that our species' greatest flaw, our tribalism, our aggression, was also inextricably linked to our greatest strength, our fierce, unyielding instinct to protect our own. She swept her hand, and the hologram shifted, showing images from human history, not battles but rescue operations, doctors tending to the wounded in plague zones, engineers building dikes against a rising sea, astronauts risking their lives to save a single-stranded comrade. The images were stark, emotional, and utterly alien to the cold logic of the Cathar. The philosophy of the Defenders of Humanity was born from this realization, Vance continued. It posits that the instinct to defend can be expanded, that the definition of our own can be extended beyond one's family, one's tribe, one's nation, or even one's species. The philosophy states that the ultimate purpose of a sentient species is not to conquer, nor to accumulate power, nor even merely to survive. It is to become a defender of life itself in all its forms. To be a guardian against the silence of the void. To defend humanity is to defend the very quality of being human, empathy, reason, sacrifice. And to defend those qualities is to defend them wherever they might arise, in any sentient being. Kalen stared at the human, his mind reeling. This was not the logic of empire builders. It was not the logic of warriors or merchants or scholars as the Cathar understood them. It was a form of logic rooted in a concept they had always found dangerously sentimental: morality, an abstract, unquantifiable code of conduct. A noble sentiment, Ambassador, Kalen said slowly, his voice laced with a deep, resonant skepticism. But philosophy does not build warships that can bend space-time. Philosophy does not power a weapon that can extinguish a star. Words are cheap. You are correct, Grand Arbiter, Vance replied without hesitation. Which is why this philosophy was not merely debated, it was enacted, By our ancestors, the ship you see at your border, we believe it is one of them, the Vanguard. The name meant nothing to them. Vance manipulated her projector again. This time it showed an animation. A great, slow-moving vessel built in the orbit of a primitive-looking Earth, long before humanity had unified into the Terran Alliance. It was a sublight vessel, a generation ship. Before we developed faster-than-light travel, she explained, her voice soft with a kind of ancestral reverence. We were trapped in our home system, but we dreamed of the stars. We were also terrified of what we might become, so we launched a series of seed ships. The Vanguards, they were not colony ships in the traditional sense. They were arcs carrying our genetic legacy, our cultural archives, and a small, dedicated crew in suspended animation. Their mission was not to conquer, but to travel into the deep void between galaxies and to wait. They were a failsafe, an echo of humanity sent out into the darkness in case the original voice fell silent. Szeth's manipulators clicked rapidly. Sublight, between galaxies, the journey would take millions of your years. It is impossible. No technology could endure for so long. Their technology was different, Vance stated simply. It was built not for speed but for endurance. They were powered by the very thing you detected, a contained singularity, a tamed black hole, a gravitational power source that would remain stable for eons. They were designed to outlast empires, to outlast suns. They were patient. The pieces began to fall into place in Kalen's mind, forming a picture that was both more terrifying and more magnificent than anything he had considered. A species so fearful of its own destructive nature that it cast its own legacy into the void, like a message in a bottle thrown into a cosmic ocean. A vessel built not for war, but for an almost geological timescale of survival. And now it has returned, Kalen breathed, the words barely a whisper. Why? That is the question we must answer together, Vance said, deactivating her hologram and placing the projector back in its case. The simple, quiet act seemed to signal the end of her presentation. She stood once more in the center of the vast chamber, a single, small figure who had just rewritten the foundations of their understanding. This vessel, the Vanguard, is a relic of our own distant past, a ghost from a time when we were a different people. Its crew, if they still live, would be our ancestors, but they would also be strangers. Their technology is a forgotten art. Their mindset, forged in a crucible of hope and fear that we can only read about in our histories. They are hailing the defenders of humanity, not as a military unit, but as a philosophical successor. They are asking, after millennia of silent travel, if we became the people they hoped we would. She took a small step forward, her gaze locking with Kalen's. It was a gaze that held no deception, no hidden agenda. It held only the clear, calm weight of an incredible truth. The Terran Alliance does not see that ship as a weapon to be claimed or a threat to be neutralized. We see it as a sacred duty, a responsibility. We do not know why it has appeared now at your border, but we would like to find out. And we believe the best way to do that is not with warships, but with an open hand. We ask for permission to approach the Vanguard, to open a dialogue with it, as your allies and partners in this mystery. The chamber was still. Vorlag's aggression had been silenced, replaced by a grudging, bewildered respect. Szeth was lost in a state of intellectual rapture, his mind racing to process the historical and technological implications. But Kalen felt a profound, tectonic shift in his perception of the universe. He had spent his life believing that power was measured in fleets, in territory, in the cold calculus of strategic advantage. The humans measured it in endurance, in morality, in the sheer, insane audacity of a promise kept across 1,000,000 years of darkness. They were not chaotic primitives. They were the architects of their own immortality, an immortality forged not of steel, but of an idea. And that, Kalen realized with a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature, was a form of power the hegemony had never conceived of and had no defense against. The journey to the Zephyr Deeps was undertaken in a state of solemn, unprecedented cooperatio. In a Cathar diplomatic cruiser, the Majesty of Reason, its crystalline hull shimmering with restrained power, led the small delegation. It was flanked by two of the hegemony's most formidable warships, a concession to General Vorlag's lingering insistence on caution. But flying in perfect formation with them was the small, unassuming Terran vessel, the Olive Branch, carrying Ambassador Vance. The sight of the ships moving together through the fold points, the grand, ancient, crystalline designs of the Cathar alongside the stark, functional form of the human ship, was a visual metaphor for the new and uncertain era that had just dawned. Aboard the Majesty of Reason, Kalen, Szeth, and Vance stood together on the command bridge, a vast hemispherical chamber that offered a panoramic view of the swirling energies of hyperspace. The Cathar bridge was silent, operated by a crew that moved with the fluid, synchronized grace of a hive mind. There were no shouted orders, no frantic commands, only the soft chime of data streams and the subtle shifts of light on the control crystals. Vance stood beside Kaylin, her hands clasped behind her back, her calm demeanor a steady point in the disorienting vortex of faster-than-light travel. "Your explanation in the conclave was compelling, Ambassador," Kaylin said, his voice a low thrum that did not disturb the bridge's tranquility. "But it has left us with more questions than answers. This philosophy to be defenders of all life. It is a beautiful concept, but the universe is not beautiful. It is hostile. It is a realm of predators and prey. How can such a philosophy survive in the face of that reality?" Vance did not look at him, her gaze fixed on the unreal energies outside the viewport. "It survives because it is not passive. Defending life does not mean refusing to fight. It means understanding what is worth fighting for. We do not fight for territory, for resources, for pride. We fight for the right of a sentient mind to exist, to learn, to grow. We fight against oblivion. We fight against those who would impose silence on the cosmic conversation. It is a difficult path. Our own history is proof of how many times we have stumbled. But the Vanguard is a testament to the fact that we have been trying for a very, very long time." "A promise kept across 1,000,000 years, Zeth murmured, his voice filled with a scholar's awe. "The energy required to maintain the ship systems, the integrity of the stasis pods, the archives, it is beyond comprehension. Their science must have been a different kind of science, less concerned with speed and force, more with permanence and stability." As they emerged from hyperspace into the Zephyr deeps, a collective hush fell over the bridge. There it was, the Vanguard. It was larger than any of their sensors had truly conveyed. It filled the main view screen, a silent black void against the distant tapestry of stars. It was not just a ship, it was a piece of geography, a feature of space itself. Its hull drank the light, reflecting nothing. No energy emanated from it now, it was utterly inert, a monument of perfect, patient waiting. "It is waiting for us," Vance said softly. "It has detected our approach." As if on cue, a channel of communication opened. Not a broad transmission, but a tightly focused laser of information, directed with pinpoint accuracy at the human vessel, the olive branch. The message was simple, composed in an archaic but understandable dialect of a human root language. "Identity acknowledged, Terran Alliance. Successor state, we are the Vanguard, stand by to receive docking coordinates. The conversation has been long delayed." The voice was synthesized, calm, and impossibly ancient. Kaylin felt the fine cilia on his antennae stand on end. The Cathar warships, bristling with arms, were completely ignored. The diplomatic cruiser, the seat of hegemonic power in this sector, was irrelevant. After 1,000,000 years of silence, the Vanguard wished to speak only to its children. "My vessel will proceed alone," Vance stated, turning to Kaylin. It was not a request. "This is a matter of family, but I would consider it an honor if you and Loremaster Zeth would accompany me as witnesses. This moment belongs not just to humanity, but to all who share this galaxy with us." The offer was a masterful stroke of diplomacy, an extension of trust that instantly disarmed any lingering Cathar suspicion. Vorlag, monitoring from his own command ship, would surely protest, but Kaylin's authority was absolute. To witness this reunion was an opportunity no arbiter could refuse. The short shuttle ride from the Majesty of Reason to the Olive Branch, and then from there toward the monolithic black hull of the Vanguard, was undertaken in a profound silence. As they approached, a section of the seamless hull shimmered and dissolved, revealing a docking bay bathed in a soft, white light. The interior was as stark and minimalist as the exterior. There were no crew members, only silent, floating robotic drones that guided their ship into its berth with effortless precision. The air inside was cool, clean, and recycled with an efficiency that bordered on the miraculous. The corridors were wide, fashioned from the same matte black material as the hull, lit by glowing strips of light embedded in the walls. An automated guideway slid out from the floor, and a calm, synthesized voice invited them to board. As they were carried deep into the heart of the ship, Kaylin felt the sheer, oppressive age of the vessel. It was not a place of decay, it was a place of perfect preservation. It was a museum, a tomb, and a seed all at once. They were brought to a chamber that was clearly the ship's command center, but it was unlike any bridge Kaylin had ever seen. There were no command chairs, no tactical displays, no weapons consoles. The room was a perfect sphere. In the center floated a glowing orb of white light, the source of the ship's disembodied voice. The walls of the sphere were a living star chart, a three-dimensional, real-time representation of the universe outside, rendered with a clarity that was breathtaking. They could see their own small flotilla, the distant nebulae, the spiraling arms of their galaxy, and beyond that, the faint, ghostly smudges of other galaxies. "Welcome, children of Earth," the voice emanated from the orb of light. It was genderless, ageless, a voice of pure intellect. "And welcome, guests of the Cathar hegemony. I am the warden, the consciousness of this vessel." "You are an artificial intelligence?" Zeth asked, his voice trembling with excitement. "The term is adequate," the warden replied. "I am the custodian of the mission, the keeper of the promise. For 3,428,951 standard Terran years, I have guided this vessel through the intergalactic void. I have maintained its systems, I have protected its cargo, and I have watched." "The crew," Vance asked, her own voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Are they?" "They sleep," the warden said. "In the heart of this vessel, in the Genesis chamber, they await the moment of their awakening. They are the first children, the founders of the mission. They are to be awakened only when the conditions of the Prime Directive have been met." "And what is the Prime Directive?" Kalen asked, unable to restrain his own curiosity. The star chart around them shifted. It zoomed out, pulling away from their own galaxy until it was just one of countless points of light in a vast cosmic web. "The Prime Directive was born of a great and terrible discovery made by my creators. In their infancy, as they first turned their radio telescopes to the heavens, they expected to find a universe teeming with signals, with the chatter of civilizations. They found only silence, the great silence." The term sent a chill through Kalen's very being. It was an ancient, philosophical paradox his own people had debated for millennia. "They assumed it was a matter of distance or of incompatible technologies," the warden continued, its voice taking on a somber, pedagogical tone. "But as their science advanced, they developed new ways of seeing, neutrino telescopes, gravitational wave observatories. They began to search not for signals, but for the telltale artifacts of astroengineering, Dyson swarms, star lifting, the waste heat of Type II and Type III civilizations. They found nothing, not in our galaxy. Not in Andromeda, not in any of the galaxies within the local group." The star chart highlighted their cluster of galaxies, a lonely island in an immense void. "They found ruins," the warden said, and the word hung in the air like a death sentence. "Faint, ghostly traces of immense energies expended billions of years ago, the hyperspectral fossils of civilizations that had reached unimaginable heights of power and had then vanished. All of them, without exception. There was a pattern, a filter. A force that culled intelligent life, once it reached a certain threshold of technological or energetic capability." A wave of cold dread, pure and absolute, washed over Kalen. This was beyond the scope of galactic politics, of empires and wars. This was a matter of fundamental cosmic law. "My creators did not know the nature of this filter," the warden explained. "Was it a natural phenomenon, a cosmic predator, the result of an inescapable technological trap? They could not say, but they saw the silence and they understood its meaning. The universe was a hunting ground, and sooner or later the hunter would come. They did not have the power to fight it, so they enacted a strategy of preservation. They created the vanguards. They sent us into the great dark, into the voids between the galactic clusters where the hunter would be least likely to look. Our mission was to survive, to carry the spark of life and consciousness through the long night, and to turn one day to see what had become of the galaxy we left behind." "And you have returned now," Vance said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why, have you detected a threat?" "I have," the warden confirmed, and the simple affirmation was more terrifying than any declaration of war. The star chart zoomed back in, focusing on the far side of their galaxy, on the distant, unexplored rim. A region of space began to glow with a faint, sickly purple light. "My long-range gravitational sensors, refined over millions of years of silent observation, have detected an anomaly, a wave of null spacetime. It is not an energy field. It is not a fleet of ships. It is an advancing front of absolute cessation. A wave that extinguishes the laws of physics as it passes, leaving behind only sterile, empty vacuum. It moves at a significant fraction of the speed of light, and it is entering our galaxy." The display showed the projected path of the wave. It would sweep through the galaxy over the next several thousand years, a silent, inexorable tide of cosmic death. Everything in its path, stars, planets, civilizations, life, would simply cease to be. This, the warden said, its calm, synthesized voice and unnerving counterpoint to the horror on the display, is the Great Silence. It is not a predator. It is a process, a fundamental cyclical cleansing of the universe. The full weight of the revelation crashed down upon Kalen. The petty squabbles of the hegemony and its rivals, the fear of a mysterious warship, the rise and fall of empires. It was all the frantic activity of children playing in the sand while the tide rolled in. They had been arguing over the shape of the seashells, unaware that the entire beach was about to be washed away. My return was triggered by its detection, the warden continued. My secondary directive is now active. The prime directive was survival. The secondary directive is defense. My creators did not know if this force could be fought, but they were human, and their defining characteristic was not logic or power or even survival. It was hope, a defiant, illogical, and often foolish hope. They believed that if life were given enough time, if consciousness were allowed to spread and connect, it might one day be strong enough, wise enough to stand against the silence, to fight for its right to exist. The orb of light pulsed, and a new message was transmitted, not just to their small group, but to every ship in the flotilla, Cathar and human alike. It was broadcast on all channels, an open declaration to the void. Hailing, we are the vanguard, we are the defenders of humanity, and we are now calling all defenders of life. The long night is ending. The final war has begun. The message repeated, a beacon of impossible defiance against a backdrop of cosmic horror. In the spherical chamber at the heart of the ancient ship, Kalen looked at Ambassador Vance. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with a fierce, unwavering light. He saw in her the reflection of the ancestors who had flung this incredible vessel into the void, a species that had looked upon the vast, silent, terrifying emptiness of the universe, and instead of despairing, had decided to build a shield. He, the grand arbiter of the Cathar hegemony, the leader of an empire that measured its age in millennia, felt a sensation he had not experienced since he was a youngling. He felt awe. He felt a profound, humbling respect for this young, chaotic, emotional species that had just been revealed not as a minor player on the galactic stage, but as its oldest and most determined guardians. He turned his gaze to the holographic representation of the encroaching silence, the wave of absolute oblivion. It was vast, unstoppable, a force of nature beyond all comprehension. And yet, for the first time, it did not seem like an ending. The vanguard was here. The humans were here. And the Cathar, he knew with a certainty that resonated in the very core of his being, would stand with them. The silence was coming. But for the first time in the history of the universe, someone was going to be there to shout back. The great galactic conversation was not over. It had just truly begun.